Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another powerful episode of Sephardic Presents, where we explore the eternal wisdom of the Torah in real time with our community. I'm your host, Nathaniel, and I'm joined by the ever insightful, sometimes controversial Sam Bendayan. Good morning, Sam.
Oh boy, what an intro. Good morning, Nathaniel. Always great to be learning together with you and everyone in the community.
Thank you. Today we're diving into Parashat Chukat, one of the most mysterious and emotionally intense parshiot in the Torah. This week we face the paradox of the Red Heifer, experience the loss of two great leaders, which we just read about, Miriam and Aharon, and witness Moshe's most painful moment of disobedience. We also encounter war, water, and whispers of redemption in this parasha. This parasha is layered. So you have ritual law, national tragedy, and divine miracles all in one. So we're going to unpack it together. And with your help, as always, if something speaks to you, drop your thoughts in the chat. We're listening. I'm trying to watch for it. So let's begin with a mystery that opens our portion and has perplexed sages for generations. What is the purpose of the red heifer ritual? The Parsha opens with the Chok, a decree without rational explanation. The law of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer. It purifies the impure, but paradoxically makes the pure impure. That makes sense?
Yeah,
So
clear as
it
mud.
purifies the impure, but paradoxically makes the pure impure. So, why do you think God gives us commandments that we can't understand? What's the value of a chok? I'll
Well,
open it up
there
for
was
discussion. Go on,
there
Sam.
was one time when I was young and I was at a temple and I was talking to a doctor and he told me something that I always remembered. He told me, "What you don't understand will fill many libraries and thousands of books." Right? So, uh, you know, things that we don't understand are a dime a dozen, you know. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of things we don't understand. And this one, uh, I'm really stumped as well. I mean, it's really, a cow that has to be red and without blemish is normal, right? All of the offerings to Hashem were supposed to be without blemish. But
Right.
why does it have to be red? Why does it have to be a cow? The only thing that strikes a chord is that a cow is a domesticated animal. And domesticated animals were introduced very early in human history. And it's not, it's one of those things where, as far as I know, there's no clear answer as to how they were introduced, unless you get into some pretty controversial sources. But uh, the interesting thing about a cow is that, uh, as far as I know, there are no wild versions of cows, right? You look at dogs, for example, you say, well, we domesticated dogs, but you can see wolves, right? A wolf is like
Hmm.
a wild version of a dog. As far as I know, you don't see anything like that with cows. There doesn't seem to be an animal that's closely related that's wild. And so, how was the cow ever introduced? And therefore, and then continuing with that is why does this have to be a cow? And does it have something to do with the fact that it was domesticated and somehow introduced early in our history? That's the only thing that I can think about. I have no idea why it needs to be read. This does purify apparently those in contact with death in some way, shape, or form. So if you handled a dead body, if you touched a dead body, things like that, then you have to go outside the camp and sprinkle with this water that was mixed with the ashes of the red cow,
Yeah.
and that's how
Well,
it purifies.
I see where you're going with the red heifer and taking that angle to it. What if it's less than that? What if it's just, you know, it's the hook because its logic defies human understanding. They say even King Solomon couldn't comprehend it.
The cow, I believe the rabbi said that the cow that purified was a compensation for the sin of the egel, of the calf.
Mm,
And that is why the mother comes to put order again, like a child who has misbehaved and ruined something, and the mother comes and straighten out the situation.
That's
That's what the
interesting.
rabbi said the cow is. Another reason for the red cow, it is the red always signified sin. It was associated with sin. And
hmm
therefore, that is why you have the hyssop, and you have also the cedar, and you have the tohalat shanit, which is the scarlet. It was all to say that there is the noble one, the elevated one, and the humble one in sin are all together, but they can be redeemed through the living waters. Let us not forget that the bull also was a very important god in Egypt. So
Sure.
there is
Yes.
also this disassociation of Torah from what was an elevation of the cow in Egypt and the surrounding civilizations.
Yes, yes. The bull was a very, very important cult figure in many civilizations, but well, what you mentioned is interesting. So I think you're saying that in the golden calf, the calf was a young cow.
Right.
So the calf sort of misbehaved, kind of is the idea. And then here comes the adult cow to sort of put things in order, the same way that a mother straightens out his child. That's interesting. I had never heard that one. Um,
That's what they say. The cow is about 3 years old. The calf is much younger. And it is this connotation that the rabbi makes by saying the calf was a sin and it was atoned by the mother.
right. And interesting enough, there's a lot of legends around the red cow having to do with the coming of the Messiah and the end times. And there was actually a show, I believe it was on Netflix a while ago, years ago, called The Dig. And actually, the first scene in the show is when they found the 10th red cow in history, because apparently there's only been nine, according to the legend. And then when the 10th red cow shows up, uh, this is the time of Mashiach, and this is actually how the show began, interestingly enough. So I don't know if anybody has any more insight into that legend. I've heard of it. I don't know it very well, however.
Yeah, so it's not that there were only nine red cows throughout history. It's that
Okay.
only nine red cows were slaughtered in this particular ritual.
Okay.
The
Actually,
10th, according
it
to
was from
tradition, will
Moshe.
be prepared by Messiah.
The red cow ashes of Aharon of Moshe are going to last until Ezra, which is about 400 years, and then there is a second purification with the ashes of the red cow under Ezra, and then Joshua. So it said it had been really only 7 times until the destruction of the temple. Then the rite disappeared.
hmm
Oh, wow.
Well, they say the 10th won't come until the third temple's built.
So the original red cow's ashes lasted until Ezra. So they
Right.
lasted 400 years.
That's right.
Wow. So that sounds kind of, I mean, a cow has a lot of ashes, I guess, right? It would be a
Right.
large amount of ashes, but still, it seems like a lot of people would have come into contact with death throughout 400 years. And
Yes,
Well,
but like
interesting.
like the like the Maimonides said, it was only in reference to the temple. People who had been close to a cadaver could not come into the temple. It did not touch the public. It was only in relation to the temple.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing. So they kept the rite going for all those centuries.
Right.
Yeah, well, I like to add if I could.
Sure.
So, just in reference to what she was saying earlier, all that stuff can be found in the Midrash Rabbah, if I remember correctly. But just what you mentioned about, how long, this ritual had lasted and how many people came in contact with dead bodies and so on and so forth. The Mishnah states that the water was regularly, I mean, the ashes were regularly diluted with living water. And that's kind of what kept, the ritual happening for, decades at a time.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the other interesting point you brought up, Nathaniel, is about the chokim or the chok, which are laws that we don't understand, right? Now, are there levels of logic or reasoning or something else beyond our reach? Undoubtedly, right? Very, very
we've
much.
been
You need to agree
we've
on the
been
rules.
focusing a lot on the red heifer, but I'd like to take some time to focus on the other ingredients because the other ingredients do actually make sense.
Okay.
Cedar wood, hyssop, and thrown into the fire, consuming the cow, which is going to be fat. That is a primitive soap recipe.
Okay. Is that so? So that's like okay, interesting. So that's how they made soap, you're saying?
Yes, cedar wood, hyssop, and some sort of animal fat was
Tallow
how
or
they
something.
made soap during the Bronze Age.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I actually played once with making my own soap, not very successfully, but yeah, that is interesting. So
Well,
there
it's
water,
definitely a pleasing odor.
yeah, the water would be sprinkled on the person, so it's almost like showering with soapy water, is what you're saying.
Yes, and also the
Hmm.
priest shall wash his garments and bathe his body in the water.
In
I
that water
think
or just in water in general?
in water. I believe it was to absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Torah was very worried that this Christ who can purify the impure can become deified.
Oh,
Therefore, I think this was the lesson, warning us about absolute power.
yeah.
That
And
is why the priest had to bathe himself. Anyone who touched, who sprinkled, who did anything had to be purified in order to bring back the man to size. You
yeah,
are not the one dispensing the purity. I am the one, you are only my medium.
right. And
That's easier to get your head
That's good.
around.
I
yeah,
want to add to that.
sure.
That just reminded me of something. The two things actually, Moshe Rabbeinu. The Midrashim talk about how Moshe Rabbeinu, when he came down from Har Sinai, and his face was glowing, that he would continue to cover his face, and the Torah doesn't really bring it up again, but the Agadah says that he would continue to cover his face until he would speak with God, with Hashem directly, and he would do that so that the people wouldn't deify him, and that kind of shows that their propensity to do so. And even later, when his body is buried and Hashem buries him directly, and no one knows where his body is, it was also for that fact. But we see that the one thing that lasted for centuries was the Nehushtan, the serpent, the bronze serpent, and later we see it, with King, I think it was Yoshiao Hamelech, where they were, the Israelites, they were worshiping it. So it shows that propensity for people to deify these,
Mhm. Mhm.
mystical objects.
And
True.
there's something I read recently about the Sabbatean revolt, Shabbatai Tzvi, and some of the movements that kind of spun off of there.
Oh yeah.
And one of the mechanisms they used to go down a wrong path and to commit all kinds of heresy is that they believed, and they supposedly got this from the Kabbalah, but I'm sure it was twisted. They believed that they could actually go into sin and they could commit sins, but they could somehow turn them around and purify them. and
Mhm.
thus help with the tikkun olam, right? To repair the world by actually committing sins.
Yeah.
So it was a very twisted way of looking at things, but it comes from the fact that you think I have the power to purify something.
Right.
And so that's the original mistake. If you stay away from that, you realize it's a bunch of nonsense because I mean, you can imagine what these people could have done with ideas like that. They could have done anything and then justified it as, oh, I'm helping to purify the world. So
Yeah.
very
I mean,
interesting.
you don't
Well,
forget, with along with the Shabbatai Zvi revolution that went on, he was, what we would call Ashkenazi and, today, but, a lot of his following were also, Ashkenazim, and they, of course, grew up, uh, in the galut that's kind of ran by by the Catholics at the time. I mean,
Right.
even Shabbatai Zvi himself was, I think, from Poland, so, they had that cultural backdrop with the Catholic Church, and of course you would imagine that some of that intermingled. Of course, when he went to the East, the Muslims and the Jews there didn't really follow him as heavily, because I think they
Right.
didn't have that backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
mhm.
Yep, absolutely.
Very
Well, we
So,
good.
have seen the abuses of the Pope, the papal being infallible,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
and the abuses of the Catholic Church. We have seen an example of this power used by the clerics,
yeah,
and that is why the Torah is very strict about it. It's
right,
another revolution of the Torah.
right. And we always
Anybody
talk
with too
about,
much power.
yeah, we always talk about the pursuit of power is the gateway to evil, right? Power
Mhm.
belongs to Hashem, not
Mm-hmm.
to any human. So,
So let's move to the next thing. People here I've got highlighted in the Parasha, the people complain about the water again. And here's the famous moment where Moses strikes the rock instead of speaking to it. And the result, as we know, is he's denied entry into the land of Israel, the
Mhm.
promised
right,
land.
right.
Do
And
you
this is,
think, God told Moses to speak to the rock, but he struck it instead? And the sages debate why this was so serious. Was it about anger, leadership? Do you think the punishment was fair? Or what was the deeper message again for future leaders as we're talking about potentially power struggle or power?
I mean,
We have the
this,
example of Nadab and Abihu when they died. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Aharon, this is how God sanctifies himself in the eyes of the people to
In
show that
what way? What was the
the
example?
the smallest infraction of the mighty must have dire consequences.
By touching the tabernacle.
Anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And
So
that is
I think going along those lines, what's interesting about this punishment is that how much the people of Israel have felt, right, after this,
The
when,
guilt.
right, when they drank the water and then everything was fine. And then they must have thought about it and said, wow, Moses is not going into the promised land. And it's because of us. It's because we started this and man, we're always driving them crazy. We're pushing them and we're always rebelling. How much of that went into this punishment, right? How much of that is the purpose of this? And imagine that it stayed that way, right? All the way to the end when Moses
Well,
had to
was this group
talk.
allowed in?
they are the new generation.
Oh, this is the new generation when
It
this
is a new
happens.
it is a new generation, and that is why I
It's a
do believe
lesson learned.
according to Rabbi Tanhuma really stands for Moshe Rabbeinu. He said, actually, Moshe Rabbeinu, seeing he's a prophet, he can foresee and foretells that the people is still going to commit sins. And therefore, since the new generation has not seen the revelation, he makes of himself an example of God's justice. That is
Oh
Rabbi
wow.
Tanhuma.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. So he made a scene so that God would act, and then the younger generation would see what had happened.
That's
Yeah, that's
powerful.
They were not present at the revelation. It needed something striking to this new generation. Therefore, according to Rabbi Tanhuma, this is what he made of himself. He decided to sacrifice, and he says, according to the Midrash, Moshe Rabbeinu said to God, let me not die the death of the people who rebelled against you, the former generation.
and
Make me a special sinner.
right. And what's interesting about this is that uh, we think, oh, Moses might have been allowed into the promised land, but the reality was Moses was approaching 120 years of age. And there is pretty much, we know from the Torah that there was sort of a genetic limitation on the life of humans where they couldn't live much more than 120 years. And so Moses was likely going to die anyways. And what better way to go out than to use his own death to further the mission?
Mm-hmm.
So he sacrificed himself even at the moment of death to say, you know what? Here's another lesson these people can learn. And imagine how real it must have been at the moment when Moses said, that's it, I'm not going, I'm going up to the mountain, I'm going to die. And then the Israelites were going to continue without him. That was going to stay with him always to say, wow, because of that situation, he was not allowed to go in. And so there was a
I
very, very powerful
I
punishment.
think I think it
I
is the
also
ultimate.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, James.
I also read a midrash that said that if Moses had entered the land of Israel and he would have built the temple and his temple would have stood forever, but the people would have suffered for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so Moses sacrificed his chance to go into the land because he knew that Solomon's temple would be destroyed, but the people would survive.
Hmm.
That's beautiful. I do believe that this was the ultimate demonstration of love of Moshe Rabbeinu for the people of Israel.
I mean, we saw an amazing demonstration the week before, in last week,
Mm-hmm.
and Hashem told him multiple times,
Mm-hmm.
separate yourself from the people, I will destroy them in an instant. And
Mm-hmm.
he had told Moshe before that he would turn Moshe into a great nation. And
Mm-hmm.
Moshe just refused over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, no. And so he was 100% committed to the mission. Here we see more of the same, right?
True.
And there was one interesting thing, actually, what you've got here on the screen, Nathaniel. I wanted to focus on this for a moment because when the people complained, we see the same psychological pattern as their complaints before. They panicked. They started saying things that didn't make any sense. They started saying, if only we had died when our brothers died at the instance of Hashem, when they kept saying this over and over, right? Every time they faced a new challenge, they wished they had the old challenges. I wish we would have died in the old one. And they just kept doing this over and over. And so now that the old challenge was no longer causing panic, it didn't seem as dangerous as when they were living through it. So now this new one caused more panic, and they would always sort of, talk nonsense about the past that wasn't even true. So again, it was the panic. It was the fact that, what was the sin of the people? The fact that they panicked, they lost their minds, meaning that they were no longer thinking, right? And they just became almost animalistic, reacting to panic and fear and whatever else. So again, we see the same repetition of the same sin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
I go on. Sorry.
that is the reproach of God to Moshe Rabbeinu. You did not fortify the faith of the people in me, because God sees that the people are wavering. But there is also the complex direction of God telling him, take the rod and speak. Moshe Rabbeinu is tired, he's weary, he's 120 years old. He has already used that staff to hit the rock. So it seems to me that God put him in a precarious situation. There is a repeat of what happened at the first Meribah. We are at the second Meribah Kadesh. He tells him, why ask him to take the staff which is in the Holy of Holies? He has to go into the Holy of Holies to retrieve that staff and then speak to the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you're saying it's a staff that budded.
True.
It was like, right, it was kind of a conflicting, like, why take the staff just to speak to the rock? But what I find interesting now that you mention that is that Moshe, instead of calming the people down, also gave in to anger, right? He gave into, this is what it appears to be, right? That he gave into anger, and so he sort of joined the emotion, panic party that was going on, and he got angry, and so this is also interesting that he did this, but again, something is off here, right? There's something here that really doesn't make a lot of sense. I think
Well,
that's why it's so controversial.
I'm going to add a little different angle to this, or add to it. What about Moses's strife with what happens here? Now he's dealing with the death of Miriam. So he has that weighing on his mind, and then Aaron dies.
Mm-hmm.
So he's lost both his siblings.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's time to end the era they're in now.
Right.
The
I mean,
frustration, the sadness, the grief, the anger, everything's balled up here.
That's a
yeah,
very good observation.
absolutely.
He
Yeah.
strikes the rock. These were his confidants.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his brother and sister. And so, and the interesting thing too is there's a lot of connection, like implied connections between Miriam and water, right?
Right.
And I know there's some midrashim or there's some statements to that effect. But as soon as Miriam dies, they have trouble finding water. And interesting thing, I read about this from some of these sources that I like to read from time to time is that the Sinai Peninsula is full of underground rivers and streams.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though it's a desert, it's possible to get through it if you know how to get water out of
Mhm.
the streams. And so the fact that it's there, I think, doesn't lessen the miracle because how did they know how to get the water? Right? And this is what we're talking about here, striking rocks, speaking to rocks. How did this even work? Well, it's because there was water underground. And then if you puncture the right place, then water comes out. So,
Mhm.
A slight correction to what Nathaniel said. Aharon is not dead yet. When Moshe Rabbeinu struck the rock, Aharon is with him.
Oh,
What the
true.
question is, why was he punished also? He didn't do
Yeah.
anything. He's just standing. Is it because he was still the spokesman to Moshe Rabbeinu that God he incurs the punishment also?
Mm-hmm. You're right.
yeah,
So
interesting.
we have this parsha marks the transition, as we've talked about,
It's
from this
possible that
generation of Exodus to the generation that will enter the land. It's quiet but clear. So after 38 years of wandering, we begin to hear the new battles, new conquests, and signs that a new chapter is starting. Moses is now,
so I had
close to
some
his death.
thoughts on why
Go on,
Aaron was
James.
punished beyond just he was the boss. It was his staff that Moses retrieved, right? It was Aaron's staff from the retrieved from the tent of meeting.
I'm actually not sure about that. Is it his staff or is it Moses' staff back
Right.
from the time of the Exodus? And
Right.
are they the same staff?
Correct.
Uh,
That's what the Agada says. It was the same staff.
okay,
The
interesting.
staff that they use at the water, they use for all the miracles, the 10 plagues, it was the same staff.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And about what you said, Nathaniel, the 38 years of wandering, we are coming, there's a few parashot left in Bamidbar in the book of Numbers.
Mhm.
But we have to remember that the last book, Devarim, was a retelling where Moses retold the story of everything that had happened to the new generation. So here we really are chronologically getting very close to the death of Moses.
Hmm.
True.
The entire book of Devarim is just a retelling of a story, and there's not a lot of passage of time there. So yes, this is we are getting close to that point where the generation is about to change.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
towards the end of this parsha, now Israel defeats Sihon and Og, two powerful kings. First of all, I found it kind of interesting that they didn't want them to pass through. It was, what was it, bullying, leadership, thumping chests to show, hey, we run this. It was just all they were
I
looking
mean,
for is a path through.
yeah, but I mean, I think it was just fear. You know, they were
Right.
scared of the Israelites. They heard what happened to Egypt.
You think
I
so?
think, yeah, I think they were fighting for their life at this point. Their
True.
backs were to a wall, and they were like, "We're not letting these people in because God knows what they're going to do."
Well,
And
Right.
I think this foreshadows the conquest of Canaan, but it also does something even more important. It builds the confidence in the people's uh, in the people that God will protect them.
True. The next parasha is Balak. It is showing us that the fear of Israel is already widespread
yes,
because Balak is
exactly.
the king of Moab. He is afraid because of the conquest. And then it spreads to Sihon and Og, who are north of Moab. So they see
Exactly.
this conquest of the land and naturally they fight for their kingdom.
Hmm.
And you know, it's interesting how this type of behavior is similar to what the way Muslims treat Jews. So let me explain myself. Uh, the Jews are extraordinarily talented. If anyone doesn't believe that, look what happened in Iran with the Mossad, okay, which is even to me just unbelievable. If you know, I read a lot about history and espionage and all that, and to me that mission was unbelievable.
Mhm.
So it's like they're constantly shocking and surprising everyone with things that appear to be impossible. So
Mhm.
now what happens when you're on the receiving end of this? When you're a Balak or when you're a Sichon or Og or when you're the Muslims? Well, you don't know what to think. And so you don't want to give Israel an inch because you say, well, I gave these people an inch, they're going to turn it into a mile through some form of magic or
Mhm.
whatever it is that they have. And then that's it. And I just want to close this with there was a famous story with Camp David when Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat had gone to Camp David with Jimmy Carter to negotiate the peace deal. The night before, Sadat was like walking around and he saw Begin like lost in thought, concentrating or whatever. And Sadat asked him, "What are you thinking so hard about?" And Begin said, "No, it's just about tomorrow in the negotiation." And Sadat told him, "You don't have to think hard about anything. I'm going to make it very easy for you. You will give me everything I ask, or you will give me nothing." Right? I'm not going to play any games because if I start playing games with you, I know that I'm going to end up at your feet. This is what he told them. And so this, I think, is the same attitude that we're seeing from Og, Sichon, and Balak.
Mm. Yeah. I wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, interesting wrap to Parashat Chukat, a journey from the inexplicable to the undeniable, from mourning to mission, from mystery to miracle. And this week we walk with Moshe, cry with the nation, and begin to glimpse the light of this new promised land. So, Sam, Rafa, Dina, James, everybody, thank you so much for participating in this conversation and bringing clarity to the heart of this discussion.
Yes, and
And
thank you, Nathaniel. This one was very diverse. A lot of things here to reflect on.
Yeah, hits home. Thanks to everyone who joined us live. Keep the conversation going in the comments, and we'll see you next week for Parashat Balak. We're a talking donkey and a prophet for hire. Shake things up. Until then, stay inspired, stay connected, and Shavua Tov from all of us at Sephardic U.
Shavuot
What
Tov.
the-
Shabbat